Commission, CSW Commission on the Status of Women's 70th session here at the Church Center with this amazing youth theme. We are going to be talking about bibliotherapy in terms of empowering women, girl children, and gender justice and equality. Before starting, I wanna talk about the organization and the history behind this project, and then I'll give the floor to these young people. As a young person, I'm still included, in them, but yeah, reasonably. And I'm Hafsa Girdap, Dr. Hafsa Girdap, and I'm working at Hofstra University here in New York, Long Island, and I'm teaching anthropology and sociology of gender and immigration and identity. And I also am one of the co-founders of Set Them Free organization, and I'll just talk about this Set Them Free for a bit while, very shortly. We established our organization with some amazing women in 2017, and it started as a civil initiative dedicated to monitoring and raising awareness about all forms of violence against women and children. And we founded our organization, our platform, initially in response to the escalating repression and erosion of civil liberties in Turkey. And then we just, broadened our perspective and, our scope. And we are now standing as a platform to echo the voices of displaced women, advocate and empower survivors of political and social persecution. As Set Them Free, we seek to transform pain into purpose by building networks of solidarity, providing support for displaced communities, and amplifying silenced voices at national and intergovernmental platforms. I am also the spokesperson of Advocacy of Silence Turkey, which was established for the same reasons, championing the human rights back in Turkey, reinstating democracy back in Turkey. And we have been conducting this youth theme. We have been organizing lots of other panels within the United Nations CSW, but every year at least one project is dedicated to youth theme. And we've been working on this project for 8 months almost, and they are doing research, they are preparing presentations, and they will be talking about the details of the project, but this is the outcome and the result and the product of all these young people. And it's not just them, it's a whole 17 young college and high school young adults. I'm not gonna say kids, young adults. They are much more aware and open-minded, believe me, than many of us. So it's the product of them. And you're gonna see other, members of the youth team among them. And I'll now give the floor to our moderator, Ebru. Just let me introduce this young woman who is also my assistant. Perfect, outstanding assistant. Ebru is a criminal justice graduate and human rights researcher based in New Jersey. And she earned her associate degree in criminal justice from Bergen Community College, where she combined academic achievement with active leadership and civic engagement. As a researcher and exhibition coordinator with Advocacy of Silence Turkey, she conducts bilingual human rights research, organizes public exhibitions, and contributes to advocacy initiatives focused on justice, civil liberties, and international human rights. Her work includes interviewing affected individuals, producing outreach materials, and coordinating community-centered awareness events such as this one. She intends to continue her studies at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, fingers crossed for her, with a long-term goal of contributing to justice reform and international human rights advocacy. The floor is all yours, young adults.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Bibliotherapy for Youth, rewriting the story of gender justice. Young people today are navigating enormous psychological, social, and political pressures across many parts of the world. Polarization, shrinking civic space, and ongoing gender inequality continue to affect youth well-being and their ability to participate fully in society. These challenges are especially significant for girls and young women who still face structural discrimination, gender-based violence, and unequal access to resources, safety, and representation. This panel explores how reading, storytelling, and dialogue can become tools not only for reflection, but also for healing, empathy, solidarity, and action. Through the lens of bibliotherapy, we will look at how literature can help young people better understand injustice, process lived experience, and imagine more humane and equitable systems. We are joined today by, as Hafsa said today, by youth speakers and mental health professionals who will each approach these questions through a different text and perspective. I'd now like to begin by introducing our first speaker, Melike Güray. Melike Güray is a UK-based clinical psychologist with over a decade of experience supporting adults and couples through a wide range of mental health challenges, including depression, anxiety, OCD, trauma, grief, phobias, eating disorders, and postpartum difficulties. She has worked in respective clinics across Istanbul and London, and since 2013, she has provided both in-person and online therapy under the Oxford-based practice she founded, Core Belief Psychology. In her work, she integrates evidence-based approaches such as cognitive behavioral therapy and interpersonal therapy, helping clients achieve meaningful change through focused and effective treatment. Today, she will introduce the concept of bibliotherapy and how storytelling can support awareness, healing, and empowerment. So, Melike, the floor is yours. Here you go.
Hi everyone, I'm psychotherapist Melike. Today I would like to talk about bibliotherapy and how stories can quietly prepare the ground for gender equality. Bibliotherapy is the international use of literature for psychological growth and healing. It's not simply recommending a book. It's a structured, reflective process where stories, poems, or essays become tools for insight, emotional regulation, and transformation. When we read, something extraordinary happens in the brain. Mirror neurons activate. We simulate the emotional world of the character. We rehearse courage, grief, resistance, and hope safely. A story becomes a laboratory for the self. In my clinical work, I often see the people can say, this character feels trapped, long before they can say, I feel trapped. The small distance creates safety. Through the character, they begin to name what was previously unspeakable in themselves. Now, how can bibliotherapy foster awareness, healing, and empowerment for gender equality? First, awareness. Stories reveal invisible structures. Through narrative, we recognize internalized beliefs, social conditioning, and systemic inequalities. When a woman reads a story that names what she has silently endured, ambiguity turns into clarity. Language dissolves isolation. For example, a reader might encounter a character who constantly minimizes her achievements or apologizes for taking up space. She suddenly realizes, this is not just the character, this is me. This is my mother, this is my workplace. Awareness begins not with statistics, but with moments of recognition. Second, healing. Trauma often fragments experience. Literature helps recognize it. When individuals see their pain reflected in narrative form, their experience becomes coherent rather than chaotic. The coherence reduces shame, and reduced shame increases psychological resilience. In group settings, I have seen participants move from something is wrong with me to something happens to me, and it also happens to many women. That shift from personal defect to shared reality is profoundly healing. It opens the door to solidarity instead of self-blame. Third, empowerment. Representation expands possibly. When readers encounter diverse, strong, complex female voices, the brain encodes new models of identity. If she can exist, I can exist. Stories widen the range of what feels imaginable, and what feels imaginable becomes actionable. A young girl who has only met obedient, silent heroines and on the page will internalize one kind of feature. A young girl who reads about women who lead, resist, love, grieve, and rebuild on their own terms will internalize a very different set of possibilities. Literature becomes a quiet rehearsal for a more equal life. Bibliotherapy also works collectively. In group settings, shared reading builds empathy across differences. Dialogue around literature allows participants to examine bias without defensiveness. A story creates just enough distance to explore difficult truths safely. Imagine a group where men and women read the same story about workplace harassment. Instead of accusing each other, they talk about the characters who had power, whose voice was believed, where did silence came from. Through the story, they begin to see the dynamic in their own institutions. Gender equality is not only a policy issue, it's a psychological shift, and psychological shifts begin with narrative shifts. If we want sustainable equality, we must transform the stories individuals tell about themselves and the stories society tell about women. That means increasing access not only education, but to narratives that center women's experiences in all their complexity. Books do not replace activism or structural reform, but they prepare the inner ground where change can take root. They help people tolerate discomfort, question internalized sexism, and imagine new roles. In other words, they cultivate the psychological soil in which legal and political advance can truly grow. I would like to end with a simple invitation. As policymakers, activists, educators, and clinicians, we can all ask, which stories are we amplifying? Whose voice are we placing in the hands of the next generation? If we change the stories, we change what feels possible. And when what feels possible changes, the world eventually follows. Thank you.
Understand how stories can support emotional reflection and empowerment, and how literature can create space for individuals to recognize experiences that may have previously felt invisible or difficult to express. And that idea connects really well to our next speaker, who will look at how storytelling can reveal deeper problems inside justice systems. Our next speaker is Zunera Haider. Zunera is a South Asian first-year psychology major at Hofstra University who is passionate about creating change in the world. This is her first year in the UN Youth Project, and she's grateful and happy to be presenting. Today, she will explore Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy, and discuss how its stories explores institutional barriers to justice, particularly for marginalized groups and women. Zunera, please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Zunera Haider, and I will take our conversation here to frame how we're approaching justice in this presentation. Rather than focusing only on courtroom decisions, we're looking at justice as something shaped by institutions, laws, policies, and systems, long before trial and long after a verdict. When we think about justice this way, it becomes easier to see why access to protection and accountability isn't equal, and why certain groups, especially women and girls, face more barriers. Our reference is the book Just Mercy, written by Brian Stevenson, a defense lawyer and founder of the Equal Justice Initiative. He shares real cases from his work representing people who have been unfairly treated by the criminal justice system. One of the most well-known stories is Walter Macmillan, a man who was wrongly sentenced to death, but the book includes many other stories involving people struggling with mental illness, children as adults, and women whose lives are shaped by poverty, trauma, and motherhood. The book doesn't just tell individual stories, it shows how systems repeatedly fail the same kinds of people. This is also why Just Mercy works so strongly in a bibliotherapy context. Within the Bibliotherapy project, this book guided us to reflect through storytelling, not by abstract theory, but by following lived experiences. Stories make institutional problems visible and harder to ignore, turning personal pain into something we can collectively examine. That's what sets up the rest of my presentation. A move forward by looking at institutional barriers to justice, laws that protect and laws that harm, how domestic violence and abuse cases are often mishandled, and how these issues appear globally. Institutional barriers to justice are present everywhere in our society. Take the legal system, for starters, where the obsession with finality over fairness results in missing out on key evidence and context, such as in the cases of Walter Macmillan and Herbert Richardson. Lack of empathy also causes marginalized voices to be ignored, which especially affects women and children in domestic violence situations. Then there's law enforcement, where racial bias within the police force escalates into the use of intimidation and brutal methods that the author Stevenson faces himself when stopped by police as he tried to pull into the driveway of his new house, even though he was not doing anything remotely suspicious. Then there's inhumane prison conditions that inflict more trauma, especially sexual trauma, on the incarcerated, as seen with the case of Trina Garrett, a young woman who was put on death row as a preteen for an accidental fire and was sexually assaulted by the prison guards. But even in more unexpected areas, there are barriers, such as in healthcare, where limited access further pushes marginalized groups into vulnerable positions, such as Marsha Colby, who gave birth in her own home because she lacked medical support and resources. The baby was a stillborn, and she had to bury her own child in her backyard, but this caused her to be accused of murder, even though circumstances were out of her control. Then there's education. A lack of education on mental health means crimes cannot be evaluated honestly, and this ties back to all the children being put on death row. Humans' prefrontal cortexes don't fully develop until their 20s, so these kids don't understand right or wrong or the way of their actions. This needs to be taken into consideration while pursuing justice. There's also the stigma around mental health, causing people to suffer alone, unable to properly cope. When access to education is denied to marginalized groups, the potential to grow is limited. These barriers affect people all around the world. First, there's the problem of ignoring victims. Women are reluctant to come forward out of fear, and when they do, their stories are invalidated and the perpetrators get away with a slap on the wrist. Then there's biases tainting the law, which is still happening today in the United States, where corrupt proceedings and police brutality is still a major problem. People of color are still being detained under the assumption that they are illegal immigrants without proper due process. These people, often innocent, are treated extremely violently. In our bibliotherapy sessions, this book provided great insight as it shows perspectives from every side, defendant, victim, and their families. This allows people from all backgrounds to feel seen and start processing the institutional corruption all around us. From there, we can begin to reimagine these systems. During the discussion of this book, we noticed how laws meant to protect public safety can instead violate human rights and harm marginalized communities. That the justice system does not treat everyone equally, especially people of color and those living in poverty. Harsh sentencing laws and the death penalty focus on punishment rather than rehabilitation and human dignity. When the system ignores a person's background, trauma, and circumstances, it fails to deliver true justice. Through personal stories, Stevenson's book helped us emotionally connect to these issues and recognize patterns of racial bias and inequality within the legal system. As mentioned earlier, one of the most powerful cases was Walter Macmillan, a black man who was wrongfully convicted of murder and sentenced to death due to racism, false testimony, and pressure from authorities. His case shows how legal procedures can become tools of injustice when human rights and due process are ignored. And this exposes and highlights clear patterns of policy gaps, enforcement failures, and a justice system that often protects power instead of people. When authorities pressure witnesses, ignore evidence, or manipulate procedures, due process is disregarded. The legal system, which is supposed to protect rights, instead becomes injustice when the system focuses more on punishment rather than on fairness and public safety. In this context, vulnerable groups are often silenced or blamed, while harsh sentencing is prioritized over truth and equity. With this book, we also discussed the gender consequences of systemic injustice, as it explicitly shows how the justice system has often made it harder for women and girls to be taken seriously. Justice becomes harder to access, especially for those who are already vulnerable. Furthermore, weak enforcement of laws allows abuse and harassment to be ignored. When systems fail to respond properly, it proves that certain harms are less important, which undermines both safety and equality. Additionally, women who have limited financial resources, education, or access to healthcare face even more barriers. Poverty and lack of opportunity make it more difficult to navigate legal systems, seek protection, or advocate for their rights. Women and girls face a justice system that neglects their experiences when their cases involve trauma, abuse, or poverty. Instead of being seen as survivors, they're treated as offenders, judged by the expectations of how women should behave. I'd like to specifically talk about a striking case from the book here to illustrate the gendered aspects within the legal system we discussed in our sessions. Marsha Colby, as briefly discussed earlier, was accused of capital murder after she buried her own stillborn baby following giving birth in her own home. Rather than asking, why did she give birth alone? Why did she lack prenatal care? Was she safe in her own home? Was she medically supported? The system assumed guilt and portrayed Marsha as intentionally killing her child because she lacked strong legal representation or ability to advocate for herself in court. The medical evidence was deeply flawed, and the case was based more on assumption rather than proof. The result, her vulnerability became grounds for punishment rather than protection. And the pattern here is that poor women's reproductive experiences are criminalized, and the abuse and neglect they endure is ignored. To wrap up, I want to focus on just mercy as a form of bibliotherapy. Instead of only analyzing laws and institutions, we want to think about how storytelling itself can transform the way we understand justice. Bibliotherapy means using literature as a space for emotional reflection and critical thinking. While reading and discussing Just Mercy, we were not just learning about legal cases, we were emotionally engaging with real people. This pushed us to move beyond statistics and see injustice as something human and personal. We felt the urge not only to question how easily systems dehumanize individuals, but to become stone catchers, people who protect the vulnerable, accuse and condemn from harsh judgment and injustice by confronting these harmful points of view, demanding accountability, and insisting that the justice system should be rooted in mercy. Thank you.
When we think about women and girls, these failures become even more complex because gender, race, and class intersect to create deeper vulnerability. And importantly, these patterns don't exist in just one country. Around the world, we see cases of gender-based violence being dismissed, laws not being enforced properly, and survivors facing institutional neglect. This shows that injustice is structural and global. And once again, storytelling helps us see these systems more clearly. Story leads to empathy, and that empathy leads to create discomfort, and then the discomfort pushes us to reflect. And through storytelling, solidarity can emerge instead of judgment. And bibliotherapy encourages us to imagine a more humane justice system, one that is trauma-informed, one that considers context, one that centers dignity instead of punishment. And bibliotherapy allows us to not only to critique the system, but to imagine something better, challenging punitive justice and calling for compassion. And this brings us to our next speakers, who will explore another powerful autobiographical narrative, Mehtap and Yusuf. Mehtap is a 10th grade student who is passionate about music, sports, traveling, and gaining new experiences. And she hopes to pursue a career as a military doctor. And Yusuf is 16 years old and currently a junior at Pioneer Academy in Wayne, New Jersey. And together they will discuss Trevor Noah's memoir, Born a Crime, and how storytelling about identity and resilience can deepen our understanding of injustice and human dignity. Please welcome Mehtap and Yusuf.
Hello everybody, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Again, my name is Yusuf. So, starting off, bibliotherapy is a therapeutic approach using books and other forms of literature to support a patient's mental health. Reading specific pieces of literature could help a patient see beyond their own perspective, which is kind of the main point of bibliotherapy. And bibliotherapy is common between patients that suffer from anxiety, depression, and also mood disorder. And it's also, since bibliotherapy is cost-effective and friendly, it is very practical and useful for not only with patients that have severe conditions, but also patients with mild to moderate conditions.
As Ms. Grice said, we have been working on this project for about a year now, and this bibliotherapy helped us realize how powerful books and words are to help people understand present social problems and historical. Through the reading and discussions, we learned that literature can open our eyes to important social issues and personal experiences. We're very lucky to connect our project to the book Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, which presents different facets of emotions, perspectives, and cultural voices. The book helps us realize and understand the struggles of people living under apartheid and how it affects individuals.
Just before we dive in, we'd like to point out that 50 to 80% of the people that suffer from mental health conditions do use bibliotherapy to truly unlock a different viewpoint to their problems. Now getting to our point, in the book Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, the story starts off by introducing us to the main character, Trevor, a 9-year-old multiracial boy who is currently going through apartheid in South Africa. And the book is told through Trevor's perspective, so the readers do get an intimate knowledge of what he is directly getting through, which creates an emotional bond with the reader.
Trevor's not just an ordinary boy, but he is instead a strategic one. We see his intelligence as he's able to adapt to different environments using his sharp observational skills. He frequently uses humor and creativity to deal with difficult situations. An example of this is when he sells snacks and CDs at school. This shows that he can turn poverty into opportunities. Another example is that he learns many different languages, for example, Zulu, Swana, and Afrikaans. Learning these languages helps him move between different racial and cultural groups. When Trevor speaks someone's language, people treat him more kindly, which shows that language can break barriers faster than race does.
This connects to bibliotherapy because Trevor's experiences provide concrete examples of coping strategies that he uses, such as his entrepreneurial thinking and linguistic flexibility, which illustrates how individuals could navigate structural barriers like poverty and racial segregation. As readers analyze this, they are encouraged to engage in self-reflection and communicate how identity and communication and problem-solving can all function as a psychological tool for resilience in oppressive social environments.
For Trevor Noah, growing up during apartheid in South Africa meant that his own existence was illegal. He was born to a black South African mother and a white European father. And at the time when interracial relationships were illegal, the Immorality Act made relationships between black and white people illegal. This meant that Trevor's parents couldn't openly be together in the public. Even birth was considered a crime in the eye of the government. That meant Trevor says this in his memoir when he says, "I was born a crime," he means it literally.
What if simply being born made you a criminal?
This led to complicated childhood for Trevor. He often had to move between different identities and communities to stay safe. Sometimes he had to stay hidden, and some other times he had to adapt to environments where he didn't fully belong. In the book, Trevor explained this by saying, "Because a mixed child proclaims the forbidden relationships, my mother had to hide me from the government." Even with these challenges, both Trevor's parents influenced who he became. Even though his father didn't have a huge impact on his character, his mother had a big impact on shaping his character, morals, and values. Readers who feel in between, because of race, immigration, family background, or any other reasons, may see themselves in Trevor and know that they're not alone, and this will help normalize identity struggles.
The book has significant plot points about Trevor's mom and dad. Trevor's father, Robert Noah, a quiet Swiss German man who lived in Johannesburg, had owned a small business. Likewise, his mother was shown as a strong woman of independence, and from a young age, she often challenged the strict rules that apartheid imposed on them. She believed that her life didn't have to follow the limited path that the system enforced on black South Africans. One of the most important decisions that she made was even having Trevor. Having Trevor meant that she was going to be doing something illegal, and that it could have even led to her arrest. Because Trevor was mixed race, they even had to sometimes pretend that he wasn't her son, and because it would immediately reveal that she had broken the law.
The violence had been escalated for years, and Patricia kept asking for help. But the system that were supposed to protect her didn't step in, and the situation became life-threatening. The problem wasn't just the system itself, it was the pattern of ignored warnings that led to it. Reading this kind of story can be hard, but that's where bibliotherapy helps. Through Trevor's perspective, we don't just learn about domestic violence, we learn about the experiences, the emotional reality of it. This helps us understand, feel empathy, and think more deeply about the issues.
Within all these different points came in violence. One of the most striking moments in Born a Crime was when Patricia gets shot by her abusive husband. Trevor does throughout the book talk about his long history of abusive behavior towards Patricia, and we also see Patricia reporting these, and authorities did fail to protect her. Eventually, a bell did confront her and shoot her at close range, and she did survive and she miraculously did survive because the bullet passed through her nose and missed her brain.
Resilience isn't just getting through hard times, it's adapting, thinking critically, and keeping your life moving forward, even when the systems around you fail. Through Patricia's choices, Trevor's growth resilience means holding on dignity, independence, and hope.
Literature allows readers to feel and see something from another person's shoe, especially if that person went through a series of conflicted events. And what this does is for the reader is it's a moment of grace and thankfulness for them, and it could even question on what they could do to impact. In that moment, the story stops being just Trevor's story, and it begins to reflect the experience of countless others who have faced similar failures of protection.
Bibliotherapy helps by validating women's voices, encouraging empathy, and raising awareness of gender-based injustice. Patricia's story shows that resilience shouldn't be required for survival, and that justice systems must protect women fairly and equally. As Trevor says, I learned that being able to laugh at yourself is a superpower. It allows you to survive even when the world around you tells you that you're not belong.
Storytelling plays an important role in revealing women's experiences that are often hidden and challenged from oppression, and it has been normalized in its humanizing impact of system inequality on women's lives. In Patricia's case, she repeatedly seeks for help, and she risks arrests, and violence just to protect Trevor, exposing how women are often forced to survive and raise families without reliable institutional protection. Thank you so much, guys, for having us this evening, and
Thank you.
Thank you.
A story shows how personal narratives can reveal the lived realities of. No, that is working. Okay. Trevor Noah's story shows that how personal narratives can reveal the lived realities of larger political and social systems. And stories like this remind us that actually injustice is not only political or legal, it's deeply human. And our next speaker will continue this conversation by focusing on another important dimension of gender justice, voice, credibility, and whose experiences are believed. Our next speaker is Ishak Alan. He's a sophomore at Montgomery High School and a member of the UN CSW Youth Project. He is interested in global issues and youth leadership and believes young people should have a real voice in shaping the future. Today he will discuss Rebecca Solnit's book, Men Explain Things to Me, and examine how literature helps us understand voice, credibility, and the social dynamics that shape who is heard and who is silenced. Ishak, the floor is yours.
Again, my name is Ishak, and today I'm here to talk about the ideas of voice, power, and social change in Rebecca Solnit's book, Men Explain Things to Me. So this book is a collection of essays that explore how gender affects authority, credibility, and whose actions are actually taken, whose voices are taken seriously in society. One of the main ideas we learned from reading it is that having a voice is not just about speaking. Rather, it's about being heard, recognized, and also believed upon. In many situations, the people who are believed are the ones who end up shaping decisions and also power in our society. What the book shows us is that women are often excluded from that space of credibility, and this exclusion does not always appear in such obvious ways. Sometimes it shows up in small everyday to-day moments like being interrupted, talked over, or assumed to be less knowledgeable. At first, those moments might seem minor, but when they appear repeatedly over and over, they create this pattern where some voices are just treated as more valuable than others. One of the most striking key issues we discussed through our discussions on this book is the idea of mansplaining. Solnit describes a situation where a man confidently explains her own book to her, assuming she couldn't possibly understand as well as he did. The strange part is, she was the one who wrote the book. That moment may almost seem humorous at first, but it reveals something much deeper about society. And how it often assumes men naturally have intellectual authority, while women have to prove their expertise again and again. Through this example, we began to see how credibility can actually become gendered. Men are often treated as the default experts, while women are expected to justify their knowledge before they're actually taken seriously. Through bibliotherapy, reading about these experiences allows us to step outside of our own perspectives and recognize patterns that we ourselves might not normally recognize. Literature helps us see how these dynamics actually affect people. This imbalance can appear in classrooms, workplaces, conversations, you name it. Another important idea we discussed is that this issue is not just about individual behavior. Rather, on the contrary, it reflects a much larger social pattern. And when women's voices are dismissed, their perspectives are left out of conversations and that shape policies, laws, and also cultural ideas. And when certain experiences are ignored or never recognized, they lose the ability to actually influence change. There are also personal consequences to this kind of silencing. When someone is constantly interrupted or ignored, they can begin to doubt themselves. Over time, people may hesitate to speak up at all, and in that way, silencing becomes internalized, changing how individuals see their own value and place in society. The quote on the slide says, "Silence is the ocean of the unsaid, and the invisible, the erased." So this metaphor is powerful because it shows how large silence can actually become. And when voices are pushed beneath the surface, their experiences disappear from public understanding. And being unheard can feel like being erased completely from conversations. But during our discussion of this book, we also began asking a deeper question. What keeps people pushing for change even when progress might feel slow? In the later essays, we explored that hope is not about pretending everything's fine. Rather, it's the decision to act even when the future is uncertain. And Solnit writes that the future is dark, but she explains that darkness is not something bad. Rather, it's something unknown, and the unknown is where the possibilities lie. The idea becomes important because discouragement can be very powerful. When change happens slowly, people sometimes begin to believe nothing will ever improve. And we hear this today when people say feminism has achieved its goals or that equality has gone too far. But the book helps us see that backlash does not always mean failure. Rather, it means that existing power structures are being challenged. And this is also where bibliotherapy becomes very meaningful. When readers encounter stories about being interrupted, dismissed, or doubted, many people suddenly recognize their own experiences. In that moment, something shifts. What once felt like a personal problem becomes something structural, and recognition replaces isolation, and awareness replaces self-blame. For example, when girls are told certain sports are for boys, or when women are labeled too emotional for speaking confidently, those moments may seem small, but reading about these patterns helps us understand that they're part of a larger system that shapes who's allowed to participate and who's considered credible. Near the end of the book, Solnit brings up the metaphor of Pandora's box. When the box is open, the things inside cannot simply be put back. Similarly, once ideas like equality, dignity, and autonomy enter public consciousness, they cannot simply be erased. This connects directly to justice and participation in society. Real access to justice cannot exist if people believe their own voices do not matter at all. But when people begin sharing their own experiences, something changes. Movements like Me Too began with storytelling. And before laws changed or policies were debated, people first found the courage to speak up. And in that sense, bibliotherapy can work on a much larger scale. Books like Men Explain Things to Me do more than just describe injustice. Rather, they give people language to understand what they actually have experienced. And that awareness helps build solidarity and also encourages people to speak, organize, and question the systems around them. Today, we can see examples of this all around the world. Girls advocating for education, women entering political leadership roles, and survivors challenging violence all start with individuals recognizing that their experiences actually matter. And that leads us back to the idea of hope. Hope is not passive optimism, rather it's the decision to keep speaking, participating, and also pushing for change, even when progress might seem slow. Through this book, and through our bibliotherapy discussions, we learned that voices are recognized, awareness grows. When awareness grows, communities form, and when communities form, the possibility for real change becomes much more stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. Your presentation highlights how voice and credibility play a central role in shaping social power, and when certain voices are constantly dismissed or interrupted, entire perspectives are excluded from the conversations that influence policies, institutions, and cultural norms. And our final speaker will now shift the discussion toward another important dimension of bibliotherapy, the search for meaning, resilience, and collective understanding through literature. Our final speaker is Semra Erkişi. Semra is a sophomore at Wayne Hills High School with interest in global issues, law, and literature. She will discuss Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, and reflect on how literature can help individuals transform suffering into purpose, connection, and collective awareness.
My name is Semra Erkişi, and today I would like to shift our discussion towards the question of meaning and how literature allows individuals to survive hardships and transform suffering into purpose, connection, and collective action. My reference text is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who is an Austrian psychiatrist, neurologist, and a Holocaust survivor. During his experiences in Nazi concentration camps, Frankl examined one of the most fundamental human questions: how people continue to live, act, and find hope even after hardships like loss, injustice, and extreme suffering. Rather than focusing only on trauma, he introduced how meaning is not only something found by the good in life, but it's something created through response. We can't always control what happens in our lives, but we can definitely choose how we respond to it. So when individuals lose freedom, security, or uncertainty, they have the ability to choose how they want to respond to their circumstances. This is when we consider bibliotherapy. The word bibliotherapy explains itself, and it's often used and understood as reading for healing. However, bibliotherapy moves far beyond personal comfort. Literature allows people to recognize their own experiences in the stories of others. Even if the story doesn't necessarily connect to you, there's always a connection. When people see their struggles and reflected in literature, they notice they're not alone. That recognition is more powerful than it seems. Frankl explains how suffering becomes more difficult when it feels meaningless. Often when people have such traumas that feel like they can't find hope and get over it, it can make finding meaning way harder than it actually is. Safe spaces for discussions are so important because they're not simply a place without disagreement, but it's an environment where people feel respected enough to share their own life experiences they thought they would never share. Instead of filtering their feelings, they tell their stories honestly, they listen to others, and recognize shared experiences. This process makes people feel less isolated, and it lets them know they have the ability to build connections and heal. Frankl believed that each person has value and it deserves respect simply because they're human. Similarly, bibliotherapy gives us an opportunity to validate personal experiences and allows people to share stories within a group so they realize that their perspectives matter. That realization leads to empowerment. Often, people feel like their stories aren't traumatic enough to share. They're scared of their feelings being dismissed, and they believe the other person wouldn't care about their feelings because they don't have anything in it for them. This is what makes these group discussions so different. When people come to connect, they're not there to dismiss each other and try to only connect to it. After receiving help from supportive communities, they believe to realize that their experiences were never weaknesses, but a part of social realities. Group dialogues help transform their individual understandings into collective awareness. When people recognize patterns with different experiences, they are led to have larger questions about fairness, equality, and justice. When awareness grows, responsibility shows. Frankl argued that meaning is found through responsibility towards others. Bibliotherapy recommends that people move beyond personal healing and towards collective care. Throughout history, many movements for social change began with storytelling. Before changing laws, people must find and recognize injustice and see their alternatives. You could find this understanding in literature. Stories allow individuals to see realities they've never personally experienced. They help and encourage empathy, and empathy encourages action. Frankl saw humanity as driven by a will to meaning. When people feel disconnected or without purpose, they can start to feel hopeless. But when there are communities that create spaces where shared experiences are valued, people regain motivation and confidence. Frankl also points out how people must individually discover their meaning, because meaning cannot simply be given to someone else. However, some communities can create environments for people to help themselves individually. When individuals heal, communities grow stronger. Strong communities are better able to challenge injustice and promote fairness and compassion. Through Frankl's work, we could see that meaning is deeply connected to human relationships. Even during extreme suffering, people supported each other, encouraged each other, and shared hope. Hope isn't pretending that difficulties do not exist, because when people are so traumatized, it's not like they could ignore what they're going through. Strong communities are better able to Hope isn't pretending that they do not exist, but it's choosing to act with purpose even when the future is uncertain. Bibliotherapy encourages this kind of active hope. With literature and dialogue, people begin imagining better futures and recognizing their ability to contribute to change. Stories do more than just describe the world. Stories shape the way we understand dignity, responsibility, and justice towards one another. When people find meaning together, their personal healing turns into collective awareness. Collective awareness becomes the foundation for advocacy and social progress. In this way, literature proves it's more than just words on a page. It becomes a space where people could find relations, a place where voices are heard, communities are strengthened, and where people find meaning. Thank you.
Thank you, Samra, and also to all of our speakers. Before we wrap up, we'd love to open the floor for a few questions from the audience. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand and we're going to give you the mic.
So I have a question for Mehtap and Yusuf. In your presentation, you talked about the moment when Trevor's mother, Patricia, was shot. And why is including such an event important in a bibliotherapy discussion?
Okay, when Patricia gets shot, she seeks for help, and the authorities do fail to protect her. And women today, just looking back at that, it's a good example that what women have to go through because of domestic abuse, and that's a good example of how it connects to bibliotherapy.
I have a question for the Zunera. What does the institutional barriers precisely mean? And how does it connect to gender inequality in access to justice?
Institutional barriers are obstacles that are ingrained in our institutions, meaning that it's not just on an individual basis, it's within our systems. And the way it connects to gender equality, that's what you asked, because there are many for women, and it also intersects with like other things, like for example, like healthcare, and like there's a lot of barriers for class. You know, if you don't have the money you have, it's harder to access healthcare compared to the upper class, and usually that intersects with women because of the gender pay gap, or the gender pay gap, or like in some like a lot of countries there are like women end up doing unpaid labor as well, so there's that. And I don't know, it's institutional means systems, barriers, obstacles, so it's kind of in the name.
Can I? The moderator, please let me.
I'll ask Ishak. So how can reading books like Men Explain Things to Me specifically help us to recognize and challenge inequality in that sense?
Okay, so reading books like Men Explain Things to Me can helps us recognize patterns that we usually might not see from our own perspectives. This book had a lot of arguments and ideas, like the author being ignored even when she's trying to talk while she's explaining her book and so on. And so it just helps us see situations or perspectives that we usually might not see.
Any more questions?
Can I ask a question? I have a question actually for the mentor here, for the expert here. Can I? Am I allowed? No. Oh my God. Actually, it could be for you and also for all of you, including the moderator, because moderator herself has been in the project too. So, so reading that kind of stories through literature, through from different cultures, from even different countries and contexts, and seeing different people in these contexts, not similar to us. How can they, help us to talk about difficult topics and to understand what's going on and to generate empathy for all of you and for especially the mentor here.
Somebody wants to
I mean,
answer?
during this, 8-month project, research and discussions, because we gathered every month to discuss different books and also the topics, that common topics. So how did it help you see different people in different contexts and their experiences and talking about different topics? There were hot tensions, hot, moments during the discussions. How did they help generating empathy?
At least for my book, Just Mercy, reading it really made me realize how deep injustice goes. Because I think most people know there's racism in the world, sexism in the world, but Just Mercy made me realize how ingrained it is in the justice system and the legal system and law enforcement through the various stories, seeing Stevenson's clients screwed over and all the corruption. So I think that helps generate empathy, seeing the stories and really understanding the situation. He goes into detail about their upbringing and their background, which influences how they act and the crimes they may commit. And even if the crimes aren't good, they have a chance to redeem themselves. They weren't born evil or anything, but the justice system often doesn't give people the chance to improve themselves. So that was my takeaway, at least from my specific book.
Because I've read Just Mercy and I really liked that choice, but I was wondering how the rest of you guys chose your books.
Actually, it was our mentors that we all together decided the books. We talk about the books and we shared their stories and we decided it together, all together, I could say.
Have any of you thought about writing yourselves, about writing a book about mercy or the law or a fiction story?
That's a good question.
I really like your question, first of all. Yes, I personally have thought about writing a book. I've actually written a short story about my friends' lives and how hard things they went through due to Turkey and how they got out of the country and many other stories. I was actually born in Mozambique, and it's in Africa. And there I was race-wise, I was white, and it's really hard to fit in sometimes because of the history, and people went through so much that I sometimes understand them. And I've thought about writing a story from my own life because I was actually born, I'm originally from Turkey, but I was born in Mozambique and I lived in Iraq. And I've seen so many different cultures and so many different people and languages and how wonderful and nice people are. And I really want to write about my life and my view of people. Yeah, thank you though.
Hi everyone. First of all, I want to say thank you for a great panel. You all did a great job of combining education and gender equity. I thought it was really interesting. My question is really all of us here probably understand and appreciate the impacts of bibliotherapy, but how would you see any strategies or incentives for people who may not understand or be as familiar with bibliotherapy and want to adopt it, especially for naysayers? What would you say, or how would you convince them to sort of see the ability or the power of bibliotherapy in their own lives?
Bibliotherapy can temporarily give us temporarily experience the world through someone else's stories. Because in real life, I'm a psychologist, I'm a clinical psychologist, it's really hard to talk about ourselves. talking about themselves story is little bit easy to talk about directly about emotions, right? Am I right?
So it's kind of reflection, but I guess you were asking, yeah, these people, huh? Can I ask something else? Yeah. You can go ahead. So it's understandable that, reading books is, itself a hard habit to write, from that. So especially for, no offense, but especially for the young generation considering AI and everything, I believe that they also employed AI, during the summaries and discussions, and I was aware even which sentence, was from AI, which one, but that's all right, because they know the book, the content and everything, and using them as an educator, in my classes, in my, volunteering projects, sometimes it's hard to push, but there should be an award at the end. For this specific project, they are going to get certificates from, participating in a United Nations affiliated organization for the, applications and resumes. There can be, awards such that, tangible awards, but also self-awareness. There are also those, even though they wouldn't, they didn't get any certificates, it would itself, the project would be awarding. So there can be, layered and different, awards at the end. Sorry.
I was also gonna add on that, like, when we first started this project, I had no idea about what bibliotherapy is. And so when we first started, I was like, oh, okay, bibliotherapy is this. And when we started talking about it, when we discuss it with the books and reading about the books, it becomes more easier for you to get healed from that trauma by reading those books. But I think you need to also speak with other people too, not just reading the books would be enough.
Discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your sharing. My question is a little bit like the one of the past question, but my question is, if you were to publish your own book today, what title would you give it?
Mehtap, you are planning to write a book, maybe, or others too. What would you name it? Do you think about it?
I've actually not thought about it before. My short story was about, like I said, it was about someone escaping their country, and I named it Marriage. It's a river that a lot of people had to cross to get to safety. And if I were to write a story about my life, I would write it, I don't know, I've never actually thought about it. Maybe my life? Very simple, but it actually has a lot of depth to it. I don't know. Anyone else?
I think a title that I could pick is The Labyrinth, because I think it's at the end of the day we go through a good amount of obstacles in our day, and I think it could kind of map it out as a labyrinth, and you're really trying to make it out at the end. Wow. So I think that's that's what
I love it. Yeah, navigating life after. Wow.
What was it?
And I think I would name it as roller coaster, because life is like roller coaster. It's not always the same. It goes sometimes hills and sometimes it's straight. So that's why I would name it roller coaster. Maybe emotions of roller coaster.
If I were to write a book, which I've actually never really thought about it before, I like more shorter writings, like poems. But if I were to write a book, I would name it Discovering. It's really simple, but I would make it about how we all discover ourselves, and even if we know the problems of other people, we can see other people's roots and the roots of their problems better than we can see ourselves. And it's really hard to discover yourself and what the root of your own problem is, so I would probably make it about that.
Thank you all so much for sharing about your books. I've actually read a few of them, so I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I know what you're saying. But I think my question for you is, I just want to be kind of transparent where the place I'm asking this from is, I think a lot of times we talk about the problems and we see how systems of oppression play out. But I'm wondering, in the books that you've read, what wisdom did you get for how we stay together? How do we get out of here? What makes life really beautiful? What makes being human beautiful?
I hope I understood your question correctly, But I would say that since we're all so into social media, and it's not a bad thing because we all want to know what goes on in the world, but I think it's important to step back and like see your actual life, because sometimes we see on social media like everyone's lives are so perfect, or that their day goes a certain way, like it's a routine every day. But I think that it's important to take a step back and like acknowledge that some days some people don't even feel like doing anything, and I think it's really important to just mentally prepare yourself for like your day. Like you're not going to have those perfect days as social media shows you. So I just think it's really important to see that.
Self-awareness, maybe self-healing.
For my book, the biggest piece of wisdom that Stephen was trying to push is the importance of empathy, and I really agree, because something that's just as bad as hatred is apathy, thinking, oh, it's not my problem, so I'm not gonna worry about it, I'm not gonna like talk about it or learn more about it. You know, and like again, as I mentioned in my presentation and in the book, we need to be stone catchers, you know, for like the people who don't have a voice or can't defend themselves. We need to like educate ourselves, step up and speak for them. And just the beginning of that process is having empathy and understanding what they're going through and wanting things to change. So I think that was the biggest lesson, that was my biggest takeaway, because I believe the same thing.
Just want to comment, this is a very fascinating project that you're doing. Bibliotherapy, learning from books and how to empathize. I want to suggest a way beyond that. For example, we talk about writing. When you want to be writers, why do you encourage your history teachers, so social studies teachers, to come up with projects that will make you write stories based on the events in history, whether it's from antiquity or today, and you'll be the hero, you'll be the empathic hero, compassionate, and you will be the agent of change, makers of history, by having conversations with historical figures. If you don't like Hitler, then go back to the time of Nazi Germany and have conversation and probably psychoanalyze him, and those will change the course of history. And if you don't like Genghis Khan, but you admire his skills, then why don't you have a conversation and learn from him? So this is a way where you can integrate what we call historical fiction and turn it into magical fantasy, that you are the hero, and at the same time it makes history not dead boring, but you are closer to it and you become part of it. And we are living in the most difficult and devastating time for the last 7 days. And your generation, I don't know how we're going to survive. Right? Everything's in chaos today. So it is more important now for peace education and peace educators to come up with strategies to give hope. And I don't even know how to advise people what career to take, for their college, but we just have hope that nothing is going to be spilling over to World War III and devastating with nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, I was just thinking when I was listening to them and I was looking at them, and as an educator, both in at college and also in the community engaging projects, this is the hope that I have, and this is the book as an educated person I write right now. So thank you. I have goosebumps from your speech, and I have students from the university because they are going to get bonus points if they join the panel. So I think you're going to say something.
I had a question for you, actually, Dr. Girdab. So you talked about using AI in
I know
in the
that you do
project.
your homework with AI.
So I just my question is do you think AI could be a beneficial tool for writers writing stories like this, or do you think we should avoid it all completely and just use it for research?
I mean, without losing authenticity with the personal feelings, experiences, and everything, is okay. We have to benefit from all the innovations and technologies, but authenticity should remain there. That's what I thought. Anything with the AI's, participation in Zunera. Zunera is also one of my students back in Hofstra.
Personally, I think we should keep AI out of the writing, because I feel like, especially with these kinds of writing, it's about the personal experiences. And I feel like putting it through AI kind of strips it, even though it's your words, it's put in a very like standardized way. I mean, like everyone knows how ChatGPT talks. Like there's all these memes about it, like it's not just X, it's Y or the M dash. So personally, I think AI should be avoided when like writing these things. That's my opinion.
That's my student. Woo! Go for it.
So,
Anybody else? Yeah, our mentor has something to say.
AI is perfect. I use ChatGPT or a different one, but in psychology, they are talking about AI therapy, AI therapists, but it's not work because there is no emotion, and we need some emotion. People use AI-based therapist, counselor, blah blah, but they feel like a machine, and I don't think a writer can get benefits from AI, but why not?
I want to ask the mentor some questions about like how you guide them through this project, and then also what do you think about their improve in going this project and journey? Thank you so much.
So I've been an educator for more than 20 years, maybe 25 years. So you could recognize the student who wanna put something, who wanna produce something, and then recommend that or invite them to your project on conditions of regular attendance and task management, assignment management, and then we sign contracts on this. And then, I don't know, they might, want to say something on it, but with 17 students and for more than 7 years right now with the youth and youth projects, this is, I think, most productive way to keep track, with this speedy and with this, crazily fast world. Actually, I'm not teaching them, I'm learning from them a lot. Zunera might confirm, or Noor might confirm from our college, classes. My classes are discussion-based, so in the official school, the formal schools, also it's all about discussion based on discussion. So teaching and learning from each other, that's the best way, I guess. Do you want to say anything, Zunera?
no, I can confirm.
Oh, she's confirming, Noor. Yeah, you're gonna get bonus points when you do that. Don't worry. So anything else? If you don't have any other questions, or if you don't have any other comments you wanna put forward right now? So personally, I would like to thank this amazing team, and there are others in the audience. Can you please come forward, guys, mentors and other participants? Yes, Tuana, it could go ahead, and Zeynep, the other mentor, psychologist, researcher mentor, any other people here? No? So there are more, but they couldn't skip school today. So I want to thank them, our mentors and students, for their, dedication and commitment. It couldn't be, otherwise if they weren't dedicated and committed to social justice. It's not just about points. I'm just kidding. It's not just about certificates and everything. They are concerned about the world. That's why they are here. And also parents who supported within this project and still here today in this very room. So thank you, guys. You did a great job. Thank you.